You're listening to ThunderQuack Podcast Network.
Hello, I'm Ty, and Knight's Tale, the movie from 2001, is my perfect 10.
Hello and welcome back to Perfect 10. I am your host, Michael Cohen, and hey, we're gonna switch things up a little bit. I'm gonna try something new here. Still sort of figuring out the format. Still a new show. This is only our fourth episode, right? So I figured rather than force my wonderful guests to sit through me giving you guys the whole sort of Patreon rigmarole, the State of the Union type stuff that I may want to talk to you guys about, you the listeners, each week, I figured that I would record a separate intro after the fact. This is a common thing amongst interview style podcasts, which this is not really interview style per se, but it's also not interview style, being that, you know, I'm the host and it's just me sort of teeing up the guest to talk about their perfect 10. So we're gonna try this. I'm gonna try and do these solo intros after the fact, and we'll see how it goes. We'll see what that ends up sounding like. Looking like is what I was gonna say, but I guess it's more sounding like. And let's kick it right off. First off, we have an excellent guest on the podcast for this episode. We have Ty Black from Wit and Folly, and she is going to talk about A Knight's Tale, and it's an awesome conversation. We go into a lot of the Chaucer inspiration and sort of the source material, and talk a lot about why a movie like this stands the test of time over other films that have common elements with it, but that haven't really managed to land in the way that A Knight's Tale does. So it's a really, really good conversation. I hope you guys enjoy it. But before we get into that, I do want to talk to you guys about a few pieces of housekeeping, a few little notes, a couple little extra bits here. It is October. October is Halloween. The whole month. The whole month is Halloween. It's not just a day. Listen, the world outside, it's awful and terrible and scary and full of things that want to hurt and kill us all. So, the least we could do is just extend the fun that is Halloween into the entire month of October. With that in mind, for you guys, I want to put together a special episode this month on top of this episode, on top of the one that you're listening to right now, that will be a special release dedicated to all of your Halloween perfect 10s. So what I need from you, the listener, this is the most important part. What I need from you guys is for you to email me at thunderquacknetwork@gmail.com and let me know what is your Halloween perfect 10. I'll let you guys know right now. Mine for this conversation specifically is Ernest Scared Stupid. It was a tradition in my house for a very long time. We would watch Ernest Scared Stupid every year at Halloween. Sometimes we'd watch it even when it wasn't Halloween. My brother Chris and I loved the Ernest movies when I was a kid, and I'll be honest, I still do. I still think that they're fantastic. Jim Varney, brilliant comedian. That's mine. I'll get into the detail of it, and I'll expound on that when I do that actual episode. But I really need you guys, you all, to write in and let me know what's your perfect 10 and why. And if you got a fun fact to throw in there, throw it in. Something maybe we don't know about that perfect 10 of yours. And then I will put together the episode. I will read all of your guys' emails and discuss and add my 2 cents if I've got 2 cents to add. If you want to send in an audio clip, you can also do that. That would be really cool. And then it's like you get to be on the podcast, I suppose, in a certain manner of speaking. And yeah, I don't know. I think that could be fun. I think we'll do the Halloween one. I think in December we'll have a good opportunity to do a Christmas one. If this goes well and everybody likes it. And yeah, and I think that we'll have other good reasons, other good excuses. You know, May is a good opportunity for everybody to write in about their Star Wars Perfect 10, right? For May the 4th. So, I'll come up with a whole schedule of all of these sort of monthly additional episodes. But here's the other thing that I want to talk to you guys about. Since ThunderQuack ended and everything has changed over, we got the new podcast. Obviously, Perfect 10 is a new show. It's being put out on the ThunderQuack feed right now, so anybody who's currently subscribed to ThunderQuack, you're still listening. Thank you so much for sticking around. Those numbers continue to be decent. They can always be better, you know, but they are decent. They are good. They have remained fairly steady. From what they were when Amanda and I were producing the podcast on a regular basis. So I thank you to everybody who has stuck around. But the Patreon setup has changed a lot. And so there's been a bit of an ebb in Patreon support. It's not down a lot, but it is down noticeably. And so I've been thinking a lot about, you know, like what can I do in order to entice people to support on Patreon. I hope that the rewards are good. If the reason why you've never supported on Patreon is that the rewards just aren't interesting, let me know that. Give me that feedback. You know, just hit me up on social media or like just send me a DM or whatever. Like it doesn't have to be a public thing. Yeah, if it's something that you've like thought about, but it's not really like the rewards aren't really there, or if you supported in the past but you stopped because we stopped doing something that we used to do. I was looking back at old stuff and going like, oh, we used to do a bunch of different things. If you have a suggestion for something that we could do, then you know, let her rip. Let me know. Send me a message. I'm open to that feedback. And actually very interested in it. But here's something that I hope those of you listening who haven't supported yet will take as a good motivator. And that is, if we can get back up to $250 a month, then I will start doing an episode every 2 weeks. And that'll be. I'm gonna try and do a guest episode every 2 weeks. That might not work out because getting guests can be a little bit tricky and scheduling and stuff like that. In the event that it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to do something like that, if we hit this 250 mark on patreon.com/ThunderQuack, if we hit that 250 mark and I start doing this and it turns out that every once in a while, you know, I can't get 2 guests in succession like that quickly, you know, I'll put out special episodes. We'll do like the Halloween one and stuff like that. But I'm hoping to actually do the episode like a guest every 2 weeks, and then still even maybe put out those special episodes, because those aren't as difficult to produce as long as you guys email me. As long as I get about 10 emails, 10 messages from you guys, with stuff to talk about, that's a full episode, right? So that's easy because it's just worrying about me. I just have to schedule my own time. But yeah, here's the thing. I am loving doing this podcast. The Lore Olympus podcast with Marie Claire was such a good time. This one that you're about to listen to with Ty is so good, and I had so much fun talking to her about this. Obviously, you know, talking to Joe about Ghostbusters, talking to Tyler about Transformers. This is, I think, the inevitability of what ThunderQuack, you know, after we stopped doing Quiver and we moved into ThunderQuack and it was like sort of the topic of the week. This is sort of the direction that I always wanted to go. Amanda wasn't necessarily always up to speed on what I wanted to talk about or down to get into it. And so sometimes it felt like I was just kind of spinning wheels by myself. And then sometimes Amanda would bring something, and it wouldn't really be something that I had a lot to say about. I mean, you guys know I always have a lot to say about everything, but that kind of cut both ways, right? And so, we'd have great episodes, and then we'd have kind of episodes. It kind of go up and down, but we never really found that rhythm. And so when Amanda stepped away and I started doing this, it was like, okay, how do I want to do this? How do I want to continue doing essentially what I've been doing with ThunderQuack, but without a regular co-host? And Perfect 10 came out of that, right? And then the great thing about this is that I don't come up with the topic, right? I go to the guest. I find people that I love to talk to, people who I think have something interesting, valuable, important to say about geeky stuff, and I say to them, what do you want to talk about? I have a list of a mile long of Perfect 10s that I could talk about, right? And I think you guys know what most of them are. But I've got Off the Record for that, our Patreon exclusive podcast at the $5 level. Go support and get that. But the great thing is that I don't know that I ever would have done an Off the Record about A Knight's Tale, right? I don't know that that's necessarily something that I would have gotten into, but because I went to Ty and I said, hey, what are some suggestions of things you'd want to do? We'll throw some stuff out there and we'll pick one and we'll go. And she threw out a couple, and A Knight's Tale popped out, and I was like, heck yeah, man. What a perfect movie to talk about on this podcast. You know what? I'll be honest. I actually did go to Marie Claire and say, hey, I want to do a Lore Olympus podcast with you, and she was like, yeah, for sure. But we have other stuff that we've also talked about doing. So yeah, but that was one where I did kind of pitch that with the concept, with the actual topic. That's just because I started reading Lore Olympus and was like, I want to talk about this. Let me know when. And she was like, now. And so we did it. It kind of came together quicker than I expected. But yeah, with Tyler, like I said to Tyler, here's the concept, and he came up with the Transformers, the movie, the soundtrack. And obviously with Joe, like the first thing that came out of his mouth was Ghostbusters. And I was like, yeah, obviously. So, but the joy has been in sitting down and talking with somebody about something that they love. Like, that's the default setting on this podcast. There's no, oh, we got to talk about Arrow this week. Oh, we got to do this. We got to do that. Nope. It's, hey, what is something that you love unequivocally? Like, what is something that you are not ashamed of, that you will basically shout from the rooftop that you love? And so I'm just having a really good time with it. And with that in mind, I'd love to do more episodes. I think that pace of every 2 weeks is something that I could maintain. Every week would be tough for at this juncture, but every 2 weeks I think is doable. And so yeah, if we can get there, if we can get the Patreon up to $250 a month, I think it's sitting at about 170 right now. So we really don't have that far to go. And if everybody listening to this that listens regularly went over to Patreon and chipped in $1, we'd get there in no time. And $1 gets you the episode early. It gets you the episode on Tuesdays. So instead of waiting for Friday. And really, I'll be honest, because I'm sitting here at 8:30 at night on a Monday night talking to you guys about it. Most of the time they go up Monday around midnight. That's actually the case. And that's not like me like going like, that's technically Tuesday. That's literally usually when, like, especially if I've recorded on the Monday, I record it and then I edit it and then I put it out. This one, it's only 8:30. I'm just about done this intro with you guys, and then we'll get into the actual episode. This one will probably be up by like 9:30, 10 o'clock. So on the Monday night. So really, sometimes you maybe even get it Monday and not Tuesday. So and that's because Ty and I recorded on the weekend, and then I'm just doing the intro right now. So I just have to edit, put it together, post it. Shouldn't take me too long at all. So yeah, the $1 gets you that. $5 gets you access to Off the Record, and $10 a month gets you the Perfect 10 pop quiz, which is a very brief, it's a very short podcast, but it's fantastic. It's so good. Tim is doing such a great job with those. I am so grateful, so thankful, because it was all his idea. He wanted to do it. And came to me and said, "Hey, I'll do this." And he's not asking for anything in return. He just wants to be a part of things, which is always the best compliment that I get paid when I do this stuff. Is when you guys, the listeners, are like, "Hey, I want to play in the sandbox as well," right? So that's there at the $10 level. So good, so much fun. Every episode of Perfect 10 comes with an episode of the Perfect 10 pop quiz. So on Patreon, the regular episode goes up early around Tuesday, usually before Tuesday, and then it goes wide release on Friday. And it was like, oh well, the wide release on Friday, but what about the Patreon people? That's why now the pop quiz also comes out Friday. And so you guys have something for the Friday as well. So if you're a Patreon supporter at $10, you get those too. And that's the thing. Here's the thing. If we go every 2 weeks, if you're at the $10 level, you're gonna get 2 pop quizzes as well, because you can get a pop quiz for every episode. So I think that's an added bonus right there. So I'm just gonna put that out there, guys. Patreon.com/ThunderQuack. I obviously, everybody's financial situation is tight at the moment. I get that. Mine isn't exactly crazy fluid either. We all have responsibilities, and the economy doesn't seem to be getting any better. So I totally understand if you can only support us by listening. If that's the case, then do me a favor, head over to whatever podcast service you're on, leave a rating and review. Here's the other thing that would be so helpful. Tell a friend, share the podcast with them, let them know about it. And here's another bit. If there's somebody you'd like to be on Perfect 10, let me know. And the best way to do that is through social media by tagging me at Arkwolf, ARKWULF, right? And at ThunderQuack Pod on Twitter. And then tag the person that you want to come on the podcast. So maybe they have their own podcast. Maybe they're a YouTuber. Maybe they're just somebody with an awesome Twitter account that has insightful, cool things to say. I'm not going to judge. If you think somebody would be a good guest for Perfect 10, let me know. I have tons of guests lined up. I got about a dozen friends and people that I would love to podcast with. That are all sort of waiting in the wings, and so I can schedule for the next few months. But if you've got suggestions, let me know, and we'll try and figure that out. But that's it. That's my whole plea for more money. And just for transparency's sake, that money does not come to me. That money goes into it goes from Patreon into a PayPal, and then that PayPal is basically hooked up to most of the things that we need to run the podcast. There's a couple of things that I then have to use a credit card for and then reimburse and all that sort of thing. But quite literally, I don't take a penny of it. None of the other podcast hosts take a penny of it. It is literally just to support the network. So this podcast, Forced Perspectives, Epic Marvel Podcast, the Riverdale Gang, Saga Continues. Right. It's like that's where that money goes. So your support is well used, and you can rest assured that it goes to a good place. Which is just continuing to create the podcast that you guys are enjoying. So I would love to go to every 2 weeks. The only way that I can justify that is if we hit that 250 mark, because that shows me that there's support and that you guys want the podcast every 2 weeks. That's the best indicator, honestly. So head over to patreon.com/ThunderQuack. Like I said, if everybody just kicks in $1, we'll get there in no time. And then I have to hold up my end of the bargain. So hold me to it. I force me to hold up my end of the deal and head over there and support us. And thank you, of course, to everyone who does. We wouldn't be at this point still continuing to podcast in the way that we all do on the network if it weren't for the support of our wonderful patrons over on patreon.com/ThunderQuack. And the other thing that I'll throw out there is we have a Discord. If you go to our Twitter, ThunderQuack Pod, on Twitter, you can find the link to our Discord, and you can come hang out with us on there. It's a great community with some great conversations going. We used to be active on the Facebook group, but I think everybody's kind of migrated over to Discord now because Facebook is kind of and the great thing about Discord is that it's just the community. You don't have to wade through your crazy aunt's mega ramblings on Facebook. That it's like, should I unfriend my aunt? I don't know if I can do that. I don't literally have an aunt that's saying mega stuff, but I think that's a relatable thing on Facebook. It's all the old people have all found it. It's no fun anymore. So we kind of left. And also, let's not give Mark Zuckerberg any more money. So let's all go over to Discord and hang out there and chat there. It's kind of, to me, Discord is kind of like having a private Twitter, like a private Twitter community, just with all the cool people that I want to talk to and that want to talk about the cool stuff that I want to talk about. So head over there, and hang out with us. Actually, hey, you don't need to go to the Twitter. What am I talking about? I set up a URL redirect. Go to thunderquack.com/Discord. It's on the end of every episode, right? So, thunderquack.com/Discord, and that'll take you over to the link to join our server, and you can come hang out with us over there. Without much more ado, let me just really quickly set up our guest. I talked a little bit about her at the very beginning. We've got Ty Black on the podcast, an amazing YouTube video essayist, and one of my absolute favorite people to talk to about myth and storytelling. And she has some phenomenal Star Wars videos, just amazing stuff. The TLJ era goodness. And as well as other stuff that's not about Star Wars that is equally as interesting and wonderful. This is the thing about Ty. Even if you're not into the thing that she is talking about on a given video on her YouTube channel, Wit and Folly, it doesn't really matter, because her passion for whatever that property is, whatever that IP is, as well as just her general passion for storytelling, for myth and meta commentary and all of that stuff. It just comes through in everything that she does, and it is the greatest compliment, the most flattering compliment that I could receive, that Ty is willing to come and hang out with me on my silly podcasts and talk about this stuff. I am so grateful to have her on this episode, and I hope that you guys also really, really enjoy this chat, this conversation about A Knight's Tale. So again, as Paul Bettany's Chaucer would say, without any more ado whatsoever, here is my conversation with Ty Black about A Knight's Tale. Okay, let's get into it. We have a guest that I am super excited to have on the podcast. It's so funny. This podcast, we haven't really been doing it for that long. I say we, it's me, but the royal we, I guess. I have, as with any of these things, I have like these lists of like, oh, these are like the people that I want to get on for sure at some point. And my guest for this episode is, I don't want to put too much pressure on her, but at the top of the list. When I came up with the concept, I was like, this is going to be perfect. If Ty wants to come on, it's going to be so good. It'll be so perfect. And then I reached out, and you were instantly into it. So Ty, thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for being on Perfect 10.
Yeah, of course, of course. I mean, I love talking about things that I love, obviously. So yeah, to get the chance to do that, and I think you came to me with like a kind of a blank slate of what do you
Yeah.
want to talk about, and we kind of went back and forth on some things, and I love that we landed on A Knight's Tale because this is such a fun one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's an interesting thing that's happening with this podcast, and it's so funny because I've also got Forced Perspectives, which I launched at the same time, and is essentially the same concept, but just focused on Star Wars. That
Yeah.
one, I'm having such a hard time like really getting people to like understand conceptually what the podcast is, and to line up guests and stuff like that. Not like arduously difficult, but just like there's a little bit more effort there. But then
Mhm.
whenever I talk to somebody about Perfect 10 and I pitch it, it's exactly what you said. It's like, hey, do you want to come on a podcast and just talk about something that you love, whatever you want? And everybody that I've talked to, I mean, like, I have Perfect 10 scheduled out until the new year,
Oh
with
wow.
guests, right?
Yeah.
And to the point that like, when Marie Claire was like, like at the end of August was like, oh hey, like I've got time in September to do a podcast. It was like, okay, cool, we'll do 2 episodes this month, even though we're only supposed to do one every 4 weeks. Like that was sort of the original schedule. But
Mhm.
it's getting to that point where like I've got people who are like, oh yeah, I totally want to do this. I totally want to talk about that. Um, and it's starting, like, I'm like, okay, should I actually be doing this every 2 weeks? Probably. Should I be doing Forced Perspectives at all, or should I just put all my eggs in this basket? It's a funny thing
Yeah.
because yeah, like you threw out a couple of options, and I was like,
Mhm.
oh, A Knight's Tale is perfect. It's perfect for this
Mhm.
format because it's
Mhm.
just like, it's essentially like an excuse to go watch a movie that we love,
Yeah.
and then just have a fun conversation about it, right?
Oh yeah.
um
For sure.
which yeah, I think both the guests and the listeners are having a fun time with that. But I would say at this point the guests are having the most fun with it, which which is awesome, because for me as the host, I get to sit back. I mean, like, if people go back and they listen to the Lore Olympus one, which I think is maybe a little bit tough because that's such a niche,
Yeah.
I mean, as we discovered in that episode, there's a lot more people reading Lore Olympus than you might
Mhm.
imagine. But
Mhm.
it is kind of at this point still a little bit of like an underground thing,
Yeah.
that's building some steam. So it's like people might not have gone back and listened to it, but if they do, um I don't talk very much. I kind of do my intro, and then I just kind of let Marie Claire do her thing. And there's a couple of points in the episode. It's so funny, guys. Share this with you
Mhm.
because I think you'll understand.
Yes.
I she it's like, for me, anytime I'm talking to MC, like when we were hanging out at Celebration, it would do podcasts and stuff together, whatever, even when we were just talking like DMs on Twitter.
Mhm.
It's like talking to like your favorite teacher in a way.
A
Because you're like,
hundred
I'm
percent.
always I'm always like, oh, I gotta impress MC, I gotta impress her, I gotta say something smart, I gotta say something insightful. And there's a couple of points in the podcast where she's going and she's like deep into this myth stuff, and she's prepared so much and she knows it so well.
Mhm.
And then she stops and she asks something that might be a rhetorical question, but
Yeah.
that I'm like, oh, do you, like, I literally say at one point, oh, did you want me to answer that? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, I can't. I don't, like, please just tell me. Like, just I'm just here to absorb. I'm just here to learn.
Yeah, I've done that with her for a few times too. Like as much as I have some. I study this stuff a little bit too, and she's got a little bit more on me in that area. But she does that to me sometimes too when we pair up, and she's like, you know, uh. Well, she'll ask a question and it's very like it's like leading up to something big and it's coming and then she asks
Yeah.
me a question. I'm like, don't no, just tell me.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Just tell me.
Yeah,
Because
because
I
my
know.
answer might not be on the same wavelength, right?
Yeah,
But you're clearly like you have an answer
you
to
got
this
it.
question, so I just want to know what it is, because her insight is always so good. So
Yeah,
that's
100%.
like that's kind of been for me the joy of this podcast.
Yep.
We haven't even done that many episodes yet, but it's already one of my favorite things that I've ever done.
I love it. It's great.
And I've been looking forward to this one so much because I love A Knight's Tale.
Mhm.
I took English literature in grade 12, and we did the whole Canterbury Tales Chaucer thing,
Yep.
and I loved it. I and so like I get it, like I'm in on the joke in this movie, but
Yeah.
like I'm not as well versed as you guys are in like sort of the myth and the like sort of
Mhm.
obviously like the Campbellian stuff, which I think is your specific wheelhouse, right?
Totally, yeah, and I think it's important to say that, like, no one has to be well-versed in
No,
this in terms of, like, you don't have to get on a podcast and talk about it, but you can feel it, right? Like, if
yeah,
you
yeah,
watch A Knight's Tale, like, something is digging, like, into your psyche. If you really like it because this movie did not get, like, the best reviews
yeah,
critically, right?
yeah,
But for some people, it just works, and you don't necessarily need to be able to verse that in a like, an educational way.
yeah,
I just like to do that. I just like to get
yeah,
into kind of the little nuances and where it all comes from and all of that. So yeah, you don't have like, that was all to say, like, you know, it's just something that I do as a hobby, I guess, is to, like, dig into it to this level. It's not
yeah.
necessary.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, for sure. It's like this is, and that I think is one of the great things about this movie is that
Yeah.
like you can enjoy it on a surface level, but then if you do want to sort of dig into some of the obviously like the literary influences and stuff like that,
Yeah.
it's all there. But
Yeah.
yeah, but it's not necessary, right? It's also just a
Exactly.
fun movie. Um
Exactly. Yep. Totally.
cool. Let's take a step back.
Yeah.
I want you to do as I ask everybody at the beginning of these episodes. Sometimes it needs it. Lore Olympus definitely needed a primer so that people could understand what Lore Olympus was before we got into that. When we talked
Yeah.
about Transformers the movie, I think that was a little bit more absurd to be explaining what the Transformers are. I think A Knight's Tale fits somewhere in the middle. So, I
Cool.
can you give us sort of the I guess like the primer is the
Yeah.
way that I would describe it on what A Knight's Tale is.
Yeah, yeah, I can totally explain it. So, A Knight's Tale is a medieval adventure comedy drama that it's a movie that was released in 2001 before 9/11. I always like to say that because I
Mhm,
think a lot changed post 9/11 in the entertainment industry. So, this was released in 2001 in May, and it had all of the right components kind of just that clicked into place, even though it
mhm,
was written, directed, uh, and created by one person. He pulled in a team of people and they legitimately made magic. It did not have a good critical reception, as I kind of alluded to earlier, but it does have a cult following. But it also, not just a cult following, but it also has like instant rewatchability if
mhm,
you just casually enjoyed it. And I think that's what a lot of people recognize for this movie is that it's a good movie to put on in the background. It's a good movie to like show your kids. It's a good movie just to like rewatch. And
mhm.
as you rewatch, you catch things and you're like, wait a minute, this is brilliant.
Yeah.
And we don't have anything like this anymore. But the story generally it follows William Thatcher, who's a squire who's serving a knight since he was a child for I think 12 years, and the knight dies one day, and in order to keep their livelihoods going, in order to feed themselves essentially, William has this brilliant idea to pose as the knight and starts kind of getting involved in the jousting with the other two squires that are his friends. And they just pretend. And on this journey towards like riches and fame, he falls in love and he learns to become, or he learns, not, I don't want to say learns because I think he always was a true knight, but he does become a true knight both within his soul and on paper. So it's kind of this, it's really interesting because it's a classic tale, but they use the anachronisms like of like the it's not like time period correct. They use
Yeah.
different music and they use different little things like they'll wear different kinds of makeup and they style their hair differently and they make it modern, they make it interesting, and they make it stylized. Um, but that speaks to the story because it's a
Mhm.
classic story that is telling us that it's not just about finding yourself, it's about kind of giving in to kind of the, you know, the zeal of life and the zeal of love. And it's not just about love, it's about finding your true self. So these things are constantly happening in the story. So,
Mhm.
and I think we can dive into more of that as we talk about it more, but
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, I think you hit on something that I think when I say perfect 10 and I'm pitching the idea to people, they
Mhm.
instantly get it, but it's also at the same time very hard to put into words what constitutes a perfect 10, right?
Yeah.
But I think that one of those defining characteristics is something that you touched on, which is that like instant rewatchability.
Mhm.
Everything that we've talked about so far on the show and the stuff that we've got coming up, they're all movies, franchises, properties, comics, whatever, they that have that quality to them of
Yeah.
like a timelessness in a way
Yeah.
of like it doesn't matter what age you are, it doesn't matter what mood you're in, it's just like a perfect 10 is something that no matter what, and it's subjective, it's not everything
Mhm.
is everybody's going to agree on everything, but everybody does have those pieces of sort of like comfort media
Mhm.
that they go back to, or the younger kids aren't going to quite understand this one,
Mhm.
but some of the older listeners might. On a Saturday afternoon when you've got nothing else to do and it's raining outside and you're flipping channels and you just happen to come across a movie and it's 45 minutes in and it doesn't matter because you've seen
Yes.
this movie 10 times already, you know exactly where we are, and now this is what I'm doing with the rest of my afternoon, right? Like,
Yep.
and A Knight's Tale, like it fits squarely into that for me.
100%.
Yeah,
I think I saw it on TV, and I would catch it at different parts of the story many, many times before I
yeah,
actually sat down and watched the whole thing, you
yeah,
know, from beginning
yeah,
to end. And I loved it already. I thought it was hilarious what I had seen of it. But then when I watched it from the beginning to the end, I was like, okay, I cannot watch it in pieces anymore. I have to watch the whole
yeah,
thing. So that's when I got the DVD, and I've been kind of
yeah.
obsessed ever since.
I guess the modern analogy to that would be like seeing clips of something like clipped out on TikTok or Instagram,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And it's like, and you're like, I've never watched any of this, but that scene is hilarious,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And then eventually you're like, okay, fine, I'll sit down and watch it, and you watch it all the way through and you get that experience of like, oh, that's what the story is. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, these are what the themes are. It's not just an amalgamation of funny scenes or like a great romantic scene or something like that. But it's like,
Right.
oh, we put all the pieces together. Shawshank Redemption was that for me forever. Like I'd never watched it from beginning to end because it was just one of those ones that's like on TBS on in the afternoon sort of thing.
Yeah.
And you just catch like 15 minutes here or 45 minutes there. And I'd never seen it from the beginning, so I didn't really understand who like the Tim Robbins character was, even though I enjoyed the movie immensely. And then you watch it from beginning to end, and you're like, "Oh my god, this movie's a masterpiece!" Right?
The whole thing
Um,
changes for you. That
yeah,
opens
yeah.
up the world, opens up your mind. It's yeah,
It's
totally
that
different.
perspective thing. It's all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if we were talking about Star Wars, I'd bring up Obi-Wan Kenobi and a certain point of view, and all that. But yeah, yeah, for sure.
Totally.
Um, cool. I so that's what A Knight's Tale is.
Mhm.
And so this is now the part where we get into a little bit of the um it's not, because it's not really like a commentary or a play-by-play, but more so just like what is it made up of, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like these come out kind of as, I guess, fun facts and that sort of thing, but
Mhm.
it's a little bit more of like what are the it's almost like, what are the alchemical components that go into making this a perfect 10, right?
Oh, I
um
love that you said it that way.
yeah, we're in that medieval sort of vibe, even though
Yeah.
there's not magic per se in this, but there is definitely some magic in this movie.
There's 100% magic in this
Yeah,
movie. Yeah.
yeah.
There is something interesting, I think, to note if we want to talk about some of the actual movie making things, because
Hmm.
I like I said, I'll go into some of the more. We could talk about like the Chaucer stuff and like the symbolism and all of that, I guess, later. But some of the stuff that was actually happening, 2001 when it was released. Something to note is that it was actually released in the same week as Moulin Rouge,
Mm.
which is really wacky to me because these are two movies that are probably in my top two. I would say like literally A Knight's Tale and Moulin Rouge are like my favorite movies of all time.
Hmm.
And just because they did something for me because of
Hmm.
my age and where I was at and what I was interested in. And they both include these, period inaccuracies that fit the this aesthetic and this vibe, like A Knight's Tale has like rock music, 1970s kind of, rock and like easy rock. And then, Moulin Rouge has like Elton John and
Hmm.
more kind of 1980s, 1990s types of music. And they have a musical feel, like, they feel kinda like you're watching a musical, but you're watching something that's supposed to be taking place at a different time period.
Yeah,
So, it pulls you in ways that I think other time period pieces just don't, especially when you're, like, when you're younger, when you're a youth.
yeah.
So so I thought that was really interesting, and the fact that, like, just this author, the writer of this, did a lot of horror
Hmm.
before writing this, and they I never would have expected this. I think a lot of people have written about A Knight's Tale in the past, and they all say the same thing. They all say it shouldn't have worked and it
Yeah.
should not have been as good as it was, but something about the dialogue and a lot of the stuff was, I think, improvised to an extent.
Hmm.
A lot of the moments were improvised, and that just made it perfect. It made it like magic, like I said earlier. And that could also be a young me idealizing this media that I kind of grew up on. But I don't know. Like I look at it now with a critical eye and I go, I can't. I love it. I think it's great.
Hmm.
So
It's I think one of the main components for it all coming together is that it just has this incredible, unbelievable cast.
yeah.
I mean, because you've got Heath Ledger sort of like right smack dab in the center of his rise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you've got Paul Bettany, who people don't really know yet, but you kind of get this feeling of like, this guy's gonna be something. You
Mm-hmm.
got Mark Addy, I who at this point is like, he's done a few things, but he's Mark Addy was one of those actors that like, you knew who he was, but you didn't know his name, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And Alan Tudyk in I think one of like his first sort of standout roles that
Mm-hmm.
people took note of, right?
Mm-hmm.
um and you put those actors together, and then you let them like come into those characters, embody them. And this is great sitcoms that run for a long time do this as
Mm-hmm.
well, where it's like, you get your actors in there, and then once you've got the actors in, you actually start tweaking the characters to make them
Like that.
match the performances a little bit more.
Yep.
And I think that like, when you have that improv element a little bit,
Mhm.
you can let everybody kind of fall into their bits, right? So when you get Paul Bettany into that character to play Chaucer, and then you let Paul Bettany bring a little bit of his Paul Bettany in there, it's like you get to elevate that. But that's where like the collaborative aspect of filmmaking is at its best, right? Is
Oh
when
yeah.
you're not too, like, the writer's not too beholden, the director's not too beholden, and the
Hmm.
actors aren't sort of, too up their own butts about whatever, right? Like,
Yeah. And I think like so this is also coming off of when Heath Ledger had just done 10 Things I Hate About You,
mhm,
and he was seen as like this teen heartthrob, and the studios were all looking at Heath Ledger wanting him to be the next like action adventure hero because women would love him, women already loved him, and so
mhm,
they would go to the theater to watch an action flick with him in it. And of course action just does well with the male audience, so they were thinking, get him into a role where he is an
yeah,
action hero, but he also has a love interest. And it would just, they knew that it was going to make him so much money. But the funny thing about Heath Ledger is like he never was looking for that. So
yeah,
they were pushing him into this role. And it was through the filming of the movie. It was not the filming of the movie, through the kind of the press junket stuff
mhm,
after they filmed the movie that he started to realize what was going on, and he started to really kind of shrink away from the fame and kind of go back into himself. And it's interesting because the movie itself, the movie is shot before Heath. If you want to look at it like this, like it's before Heath like really rose to fame. It's before
mhm,
he truly became the next it boy sort of thing. So he doesn't have the pressures on him that he does in later roles. And that, I think that's really interesting. And then on top of that, like you said, like you have all these other actors that are not necessarily known at the time, but they're like, "Oh, I've seen that person in something else or
yeah,
whatever." But you got them all together, and I think that also another element of this is the fact that they were in, I think they filmed most of it in the Czech Republic, so they were away from home. Heath even lost a friend during filming. I think he had like a friend who uh overdosed or something. He had a death in his life essentially, and
mhm,
he had all of the cast around him at that time to really lean on, and that kind of made them become very close very fast. So a lot of that is interesting. Another little tidbit that I thought was interesting was that I think Heath Ledger also got a tattoo during the filming of A Knight's Tale, and the makeup got really mad about it because they constantly had to cover it up. But it was like a looked like a target, and it had a center, and then it had two rings around it. And Alan or Paul, I think it was Paul, asked him about it, and Heath was like, "Oh yeah, this is the universe, this is the world, and this is me." And
mhm.
he was at the center. So I think a lot of stuff was going on interestingly in Heath's like knowing that this was coming, and like knowing that he was going to be like projected into this fame, and he was kind of like holding on to people on that ride. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
think
there,
that's where you
yeah.
get movie magic.
Totally. Yeah, there's a little bit of that summer camp vibe going on, right? Like, which
Yeah.
happens with location shoots like that, where everybody's kind of isolated, especially like you go somewhere like the Czech Republic where the majority of the cast doesn't speak the language.
Exactly.
Right, there's, and so you get your main cast ends up becoming very tight, very close.
Yeah.
And it shows up on screen, right? I think
Yep.
the other aspect of this movie that sometimes gets glossed over by people, but that I always love to point out and talk about, is the fact that it's a sports movie about a sport that's not a sport, right? Like, 'cause jousting is not a thing that we would consider a sport by modern standard, but at the time, that's the idea, right? And
Yeah.
it follows the like the crescendo sort of pattern of a sports movie,
Mhm.
while
It does.
also like simultaneously having the romantic plot that follows
Mhm.
like sort of in parallel, um,
Mhm.
which is great, always great. I mean, anybody who's a fan of the movie The Cutting Edge knows that you put those two things together, uh, and you've got gold, right?
Oh,
Um,
100%.
I
Yeah.
mean, on that one, you also get enemies to lovers added in, so like, come on, that one's a perfect storm. But
Yeah.
I yeah, the sports movie aspect of this, like any other good sports movie, is entirely reliant on that chemistry of
Mhm.
your team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with this one, it's like you have one athlete, but then you've got his whole support crew. And
Yeah.
if we don't believe that they love him
Mm-hmm.
enough to risk their lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to, you know, so like at the end of the movie when they all stand up to defend him when he's
Mm-hmm.
in the stocks, right? Like if you don't believe that, the movie's not going to work,
Oh,
right?
100%.
So
Yeah.
it's one of those things. It's just got to come together. But that's good casting. That's good directing, right? And when I
Mm-hmm.
say directing, I don't mean like the standing on the set and saying you stand there, deliver your line, put the camera over there. Not that part of directing, but the part of
Mm-hmm.
directing that is leadership, right?
Yeah. Like,
Which not
how do
all
we,
directors are good at, right? So
yeah, like, what are we feeling in this scene? What's the
yeah,
point of this scene? Like, where is everybody, like, currently in their heads and, like, emotionally? And
yeah,
they do that so well in this one.
yeah.
And I did want to talk about, like, kind of where this comes from, because you mentioned the fact that it's a sports movie, but there's a reason why, like, love is so important, I think, to the message of the film.
Hmm.
And it's because of the kind of where it comes from in terms of, like, what is the Knight's Tale? Like, what is you know, Geoffrey Chaucer's A Knight's Tale, and why do we have Chaucer in here, and what's the point of the story and all of
Yeah,
that? So yeah, so can I get into it?
yeah, yeah. Go for it.
Oh, yeah, okay, exciting. So basically, for those who don't know, and I'm sure you know because, like you mentioned earlier, you kind of studied this stuff in school. Chaucer is in the film as Geoffrey Chaucer, like, it's his name, it's him, and we're kind of supposed to believe within the kind of this romanticized fantasy version, that Chaucer witnessed the story of William Thatcher and then went on to write the prologue of the Canterbury Tales, which starts with the Knight's Tale. And I won't go too much into Canterbury Tales because it is kind of unrelated, but there is this the story of, like, you know, Chaucer and everything, not the story, but like his life. Like, there was a time in which he kind of went missing. I guess the myth is that he went missing, but the truth is that he just kind of wandered around Europe for years. And there's, like, a lot of mystery as to what he was actually doing, because he was a diplomat that was also a well-known author. He had done, like, a lot of different types of things for very powerful people, and his history sort of pauses, and he comes back to history, and he gets married. And so, like, there's all this, you know, talk about what actually happened to him during that time. And there's actually some good, I would say, if you Google it, there's some good uh, stuff out there that you can read about. Now we're able to kind of figure out where he went and how long it took him to get here and there and what he was actually doing. But for a long time, the myth is that he went missing.
Hmm.
So, but then he comes back, you know, and he writes Canterbury Tales. He writes, you know, and then he later writes the prologue to Canterbury Tales, which is A Knight's Tale, and or The Knight's Tale. The Knight's Tale, by Chaucer, is a story essentially about courtly love, and it is about knighthood. It is about, kind of trying to figure out who you wanna be under the pressures of what, you know, what society is, like, putting onto you. You know, it starts out, or not starts out, but, like, there's a time when the 2 main characters are in prison, and there are a bunch of, like, there's a lot of metaphor going on with that. They both fall in love with this woman while they're in prison. They see her from their cells. So this all goes on, and I'll just say, I'm not gonna, like, summarize the tale because it's, unless you want to.
No, no,
But
it's okay.
it's just like, it's about, from, you know, from everything I've read and from kind of just diving into it again recently, it is going back to this idea of, like, how love before the troubadour, like, love before this time period, and in the West, specifically in the West, was known to be like Eros. And Eros, you know, like the god, it was this zeal for, to touch someone, to be with someone sexually, right? So there was
Hmm.
this, that's what people kind of saw what love was. They didn't have a way to explain the partnership, the courtship. That wasn't really talked about. Even though maybe that did exist, no one it wasn't an ideal. So when the troubadours came along, they began to sing about love as more than just the zeal to touch someone. It's more than just lust. It's about a partnership, and it's about finding this like one to one, like soul to soul need. And I think I have some things from Campbell. Well, Campbell talks about it a lot, and I've kind of just I find myself summarizing what he says all the time, but he very much romanticizes the troubadour, and he talks about it as like, this is also, it's not just about love, it's also kind of the state at the time was the church would control who married who, especially in kind of the nobility.
Mm.
So if you were seeking romantic love, you were kind of going above the church. You're putting yourself above the church. And you're putting yourself essentially above God, if you want to go further than that, because you're saying that your own experience and your own needs and wants and desires are more important than the church. And in the in A Knight's Tale, in the movie, there's a moment where William says that Jocelyn is now his rosary, or he'll say his rosary to Jocelyn and no one else.
Mm-hmm.
And uh the Alan's character says, William, that's blasphemy.
Yeah.
But that's the point of the original tale, essentially, is that
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to move beyond what is wanted of us, what is expected of us, because we need to recognize that like our own needs and desires are not just within the flesh, they're also within the spirit and within the soul. And we're hungry for a partner. And that was new. That was kind of like revolutionary as an ideal at that time. So if I don't know if
Yeah.
you want to add anything to the to Canterbury Tales, because it's just so interesting. It's such a weird thing.
Yeah, well, I think because Chaucer to me is kind of almost like a flip side of Shakespeare, right? Was where Shakespeare was
Mm-hmm.
sort of the more like the pop culture. Shakespeare was the MCU Star Wars of the day, right? Like that was sort of like he was like the populist, like the cool guy. Everybody loved all of his stuff, right?
That's yeah,
um
yeah,
and
yeah.
and his stuff had a tendency to lean a little bit more into the grandiose and this flair for the dramatic. But then Chaucer on the flip side, especially with the Canterbury's Tale stuff, and he has the line towards the end of the movie of like all life is within the artist's scope or whatever he says.
Mm-hmm.
And it like that's Canterbury's Tale is very much like about taking I like sort of these well-known archetypes and then breaking things down and going like, but what are we as people, right? And
Yeah.
is a little bit more of the introspection that I think like Shakespeare is the other side of that, where Shakespeare is much more of the like, hey, look at this big production, right? Like,
Yeah.
and they're often talking about the same sort of stuff,
Yep.
but they're just approaching it from these two completely different perspectives. And so
Mhm.
like it's funny to me that like that line about like Will, that's blasphemous, right? And like the delivery of it is so perfect, because to Alan Tudyk's character, it's like that you couldn't possibly do anything worse than blaspheme against God, right? Because he's the simplest of the group, right? So he's
Yes.
got a lot built into that church sort of hierarchy thing, right?
Yeah.
um
And
but
I think
but
in
it shows just how well written the whole movie is,
mhm.
what everything that you just talked about is distilled into a single moment in the
Oh, it
movie,
is.
right? But it's
Yeah.
there like, and so it's not just the Chaucer thing or the period or the fact that it's a Knight's Tale from the Knight's Tale sort of thing, like that evolution.
Mhm.
This It's not just a gimmick, it's not just like a oh cool, I have an idea for a story, but it
Mhm.
is actually like there is a respect and a reverence for that source material, even though
Oh,
it
yeah.
strays very far from the source material,
Oh, yeah.
and tells its
Yeah.
own story. But it is of this, it's cut of the same cloth, right?
It is cut of the same cloth. They wouldn't have had if this wasn't if they weren't trying to make the messaging at least somewhat of the same type of thing, like, they would have leaned more on the, I think the jousting stuff and
Yeah.
the sports stuff like that. That's just framing for what's actually going on, and they don't even focus on the love story, I would say, that much. I would say
Hmm.
it's probably a third of the full picture, but that one third is so important. And on top of that, they bring in everyone's love story. They
Hmm.
have that scene with him writing the letter where each one of them is putting in their own poetry. And that's something I wanted to mention too, because the idea, like, that's a true, but that's 100%. This is troubadour, courtship, poetry, songwriting. The idea that love is so mysterious that it makes us say things we did not have in our vocabulary,
Hmm.
right? And that's exactly what Will is doing. He starts saying things and he's like, I don't know where this is coming from. And then his friends help him write a note to her, a poem to her. And it's not 100% coming from him, but it's also beautiful in that it's saying that love is the same no matter what your kind of
Hmm.
experience is. Like, we all feel it, and that's how we can kind of understand each other, is through our experiences in love. So, but then later, you know, what is it that he says? So so there's this part too. I wanted to mention this because I'm sorry I'm kind of like all over the place, but
No, no, it's good.
it's all related, right? So there's because the love part, the part about like writing poetry and kind of going off of this instinctual feeling, is about also about finding yourself, like figuring out who you are. And it's also connected to going over the church, because you don't have to fall in love in order to recognize that you are an individual who has power and who can rise above, institutions that will otherwise, put you down. Like, you don't have to have love, but you have to have love for yourself, right? You have to have love for other people. Like, it's still based in love. It might not
Mm.
necessarily be based in romantic love. But the idea of this, like where it came from in the history of the troubadour, is that romantic love was incredibly powerful because it was weird and it was mysterious and nobody understood it. Like, people could understand like wanting to take care of your fellow human, but to like want to die for someone because you love them, that was something that was not, that was not an ideal. And to go above, like I said, to go above the church, and that this is all just a story about figuring out who you are and understanding your inner power, and understanding that like you don't have to do what is expected of you. You can become your own person and you can find your own path. And, you know, to Campbell's words, you can find your bliss, right? Find your bliss and live it.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, so that's such an interesting thing in the way that they did that, because they do it throughout the movie, and it's consistent. It's very, very consistent, and it has a purpose. And it all goes back to kind of um that original messaging from the original story.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's like one of the things that's most powerful for me in the story is when everything kind of comes full circle. These things that were um laid so early in the movie that by the time that we get there at the end, we've actually forgotten about James Purefoy, about Prince Edward, right? Like,
Yep.
it happens. The structurally, the way that the movie is written is actually really interesting, because you
Mhm.
get to a certain point, like that first tournament actually has its own 3-act structure, but
Yes.
it all happens in like the first act of the film.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like there's almost like a movie inside the movie, and in that we have the whole interaction with Prince Edward and the and him having that thing of like, you knew who I was but you wrote anyways,
Mm-hmm.
and and Edward measuring Will and seeing who he is, understanding instantly what kind of a man he is. It's like, oh, you like, it's not in with me to withdraw, and then he's me either, sort of thing. And
Right.
then on the flip side of it, you've got Mark Addy's character, or sorry, not Mark Addy character, the Adamar.
Count Adamar, yeah.
Count Adamar, who's the opposite, who is so blinded by his own hubris, his own pride,
Mm-hmm.
um, and his own, like, he's so rotten to the core that he only sees Will as a nemesis, and fails to see what's so powerful about him.
Yep.
And then at the end of the movie, Will's actions of not running, even
Mm-hmm.
though everybody around him says like we love you, we will go with you, like you don't have to be alone, we'll all turn our backs on everything in order to protect you, which is what we've learned through the whole movie. But for him to then say, like, they almost have him, and then he turns, and it's this inner conflict that's more powerful than any other conflict in the entire story,
Yeah.
where he turns and he goes, no, I won't run.
Mm-hmm.
And Jocelyn is like, damn your pride. And it's like, but it's not pride in the way that it is for Adamar, where
Mm-hmm.
it's pride born of hubris. For Will, it's pride born of this altruistic sense of right and wrong, right?
Yeah,
um
and the fact that he's figured out who he really is and he's not
yeah.
afraid to hide anymore, and he keeps saying, "I'm a knight." Like, he keeps
Yeah.
saying that during that
Yeah,
whole scene.
exactly. And then Prince Edward showing up when he's in the stocks and everything, dramatically. It's just
Mhm.
fashionably late with that beautiful coat that he's got. I love it so much.
Yep.
That's where the anachronisms in this and like the historical inaccuracy works so well, is in the costume design. It's just like, because
Oh, yeah.
you instantly recognize like, oh, he's better than everybody else here. I and he stands up in front of everybody, and he's like, hey, my personal historians have discovered that this guy's a knight.
Yeah.
Who wants to argue with me? Like, I say he's a knight, therefore he is.
Yeah.
And so like the
Which
outside matches the in finally, and it's like all
Yep.
of that sort of thing.
Yeah, which is also I always took it as that he was saying, like, we all essentially can become knights, and we all
Yeah.
essentially have this in our blood because we all come from the same bloodline, right? Like, all human beings, we all come from the same blood, and that's, it's powerful. It's powerful to say that, you can do whatever you want. And there is a little bit of a capitalism, like, understructure, like, under all of
Mhm.
this, which is, problematic in some ways and not in other ways, but, in
Yeah, there's a
terms
bit of a
of
bootstrap message that
yeah.
doesn't. Yeah, it's not that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's also, again, if we look at the kind of origins of the story and where it's coming from, this was revolutionary. This was powerful for people
Hmm.
back then, because to say that you can live your life the way that you want to, not how the state is telling you, not how the church is telling you, that was different. That was a new ideal. And to pull it to the mainstream, like I said before, like, of course people married for love before the troubadour existed.
Yeah, yeah.
But the thing about, that Campbell talks about a lot too, is that the troubadours romanticized it. They didn't just talk about it. Like, people would talk about it, sure, but they romanticized it. They put it into words. They
Hmm.
gave it a zeal that didn't have before, and they made people want that. They made people idealize it when they hadn't really done that
Yeah.
before in the mainstream.
But before that period in time, when we think about poetry, we go back to um, I mean, like, if you go back to the Bible, the poetry is the Psalms, which is all about God, right?
Yeah.
Or you go back to like the Homeric stuff, right? And you're talking
Hmm.
about, like, again, mostly about gods, but about heroes, and
Yeah.
like the Iliad and the Odyssey and stuff like that, right? Like, that's
Hmm.
what poetry was. And then yeah, sort of in this period, this the poetry becomes something different, and that
Yep.
romance stuff starts to come in,
Well, there's
in
the
reference to love.
Right, and because there's the scene in in A Knight's Tale where, she's in the church and he
Mhm.
had followed her into the church on his horse because he was just so enticed with her,
Yeah.
but then, the priest is like, "You desecrate the house of God," and, like, he is he is saying that, like, Jocelyn's beauty is such a curse. It's such a curse to be beautiful, and all this, and it's
Yeah.
kind of, like, setting this tone of the fact that, the church does kind of control these things on this level, but people are starting to laugh at them a little bit, just like
Yeah.
Jocelyn was laughing at them. And she also points out the priest's like hypocrisy in that scene, like when he was like, "Oh, pray that you will grow less beautiful in your old age." And she was like, "Yes, yes, of course I will." And then he hands out his hand for her to kiss, and he's got this beautiful, like, gem encrusted ring on his finger. And she's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that's lovely." Because, of course, priests also see the beauty in material
Yeah.
things because, like, of course they do, and there's a hypocrisy there in terms of like wealth and beauty, but then there's also, the notion that beauty is beauty is something that we should all like learn to see, and we should all like acknowledge, like, again, going back to the romanticism, the courtly love and all of that, that's where that all is coming from, and that's kind of the underlying idea, I think. It's all wrapped up in like metaphors. So I think it's funny. I was watching it this morning and I was like, wait a second. I'd always seen it as kind of the shallow thing, but you could see more metaphor in it because of where it comes from and because of what they're drawing from. Because authors can find things in the text, um, without intention, without intending to,
Hmm.
just because they are pulling from somewhere else. I've talked about this a lot with Star Wars, right? Like if you're if you're writing if you're writing a new Star Wars, you have to acknowledge the Star Wars that came before. And you could be writing a totally different story, like with Andor, a totally different story, new characters, new planets, or whatever, but you're still writing Star Wars. And so you're pulling themes, you're pulling
Hmm.
strings from other things that give the message in the current work more meaning than they otherwise would have had.
Hmm.
It's like layers. It's layers of
Yeah.
meaning. And that's what's happening in A Knight's Tale is you have layers of meaning because of the previous work that exists.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where I think like is similar to Star Wars, going back to the source material is usually the best path, rather than trying to, because I like in this time period, like the time period that the movie was made, that A
Yeah.
Knight's Tale was made, to look at other either other like medieval type stories that are being told and try and replicate that, or to look at other sort of romantic comedy stories and try and replicate that, instead of what's done here, which is that, like, and that's why the movie persists, I think, is
Hmm.
that like it does have this source material that it draws from that gives it a very solid foundation, right? and
Exactly.
and with Star Wars, it's very similar to me. It's like the ones that stand out, the ones that last the longest in our psyche, I think, are the ones that don't try and make another Star War, but that go
Hmm.
back to the things that inspired George Lucas to tell stories. And I would say, like, even
Exactly.
Indiana Jones, right? Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, even though that's, you've got George and you've got Stephen and you've got Harrison, you have all of the pieces together. But instead of making another one of those types of movies, they tried to, sorry, another one of the movie. When I say those types of movies, I'm talking
Hmm.
about, like, instead of going back to the pulp serial adventure stuff, they tried to make a new Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah.
And they tried to pull in new source material with that stuff. But I think that inclination to go back and try and recapture the magic, the lightning in a bottle that was those first three movies,
Hmm.
especially, I think, like the first movie, that's where it falls short, right? Like
Hmm.
it never quite gets there, even though
Yeah.
all of the pieces are right, all of everything's in place, but something doesn't work. And it's because the inspiration is off, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you have to be pulling from the core themes and the core,
Yeah.
like, how did it make you feel? And if you can't bring that to your creation, then it's going to fall short every time because you're
Yeah.
trying to make other people feel a certain way. and that's not what you should. That's my personal belief. I have only ever written fan fiction and
Sure.
and just like fic here and there, but like I truly think that that's where it comes from, because that's what I've been taught from the
Yep.
masters, people that I've read from and whatnot.
Yep.
And if you read a lot of like mythology and fairy tales, the stuff that sticks, and the stuff that you see in other stories, and there is like kind of this mythological like shorthand that denotes what something is. People just get it. People get it when you are pulling from symbolism or metaphor from a certain fairy tale, because they know the fairy tale. They automatically get what you're trying to do, right? So it's, I don't know, it's interesting. A Knight's Tale A Knight's Tale is so funny because they decided to do something that's risky, but they're keeping it within the realm of the classic storyline. And I think that, and like, I don't know exactly kind of the discussions that happen. I know that there's a director's commentary out there that I have not watched, but
Hmm.
it does exist. I did find that out, but I know that there had to have been some idea of, this is how I feel when I think about these types of stories, and this is
Hmm.
what I want. This is how I want to put it in here, and as opposed to thinking about, well, I think people are going to like this, so therefore I should put it in this movie. So, and there was some of that with Heath Ledger, but the story I think is very pure and very classic and very thoughtful. So,
Yep.
and I wanted to talk about some of the other themes too, because I think I keep coming back to courtly love, which that is kind of the main thing, obviously. But there's also this theme of the pain of life and the constant ups and downs of life, and its love and turmoil and tragedy, and but it still retains its comedic
Hmm.
air about it, because Will finally goes home, and like he has Jocelyn as this romantic figure in his life, and he's very happy, and he has his fame and his fortune, and then he goes home and he finds that his father is blind and living in poverty. um and even then it gets worse, right? It keeps getting worse and keeps getting
Yeah.
worse, and it's not until he gets his title that he sees a hope and he sees like a future. But it doesn't, like, not everything is like fixed. And I think that something so fun about these types of stories, like the and I mean, not to compare it to Moulin Rouge necessarily, but it is interesting because Moulin Rouge ends as a tragedy, but it's a very much a romance. And the messaging is the same, even though they end differently. The messaging is like about this, like the pain of life and the pain of love, and the hopelessness that if you do give into kind of the cycle of life, and like with all of its craziness, you're gonna get hurt, and it's going to be painful. um I think that's something that really is touching for me personally, because things are hard.
Hmm.
So to have that message in there, to kind of be able to revisit it all the time, and to see like this lovely ending, it's just so touching. It's so wonderful. When Will says like, I'm not going to run, I'm going to stand up, and I'm going to be myself, and I'm going to shed my armor, right? And all that. Like,
Yeah.
he's saying, this is who I am, and I'm going to, if I'm going to die for it, then I will, because and of course the message is not that we must do that. The message is that we should jump into life head first, and we should
Hmm.
be who we are and not be ashamed for it, and YOLO. But I mean,
Yeah.
it is, right? It's kind of
Yeah,
a
yeah.
YOLO message,
Well,
but
it's and this is why I always come back to the fact that this is a sports movie, right? Because the cliche of it, and you know, sometimes cliches, and this is very similar of archetypes, right? It's like people go, or when people use the word trope when what they mean is archetype, and they're
Mhm.
trying to be derogatory towards these ideas. Cliches become cliches for a reason, and the cliche in this movie is a sport movie cliche. It's the same as Rocky, Karate Kid. I mean, those are the same movies, so whatever. But the Mighty Ducks, right? Like what? Like pick your sports movies. I just named the other four, like in my top five sort of thing. Um, but
Cool.
it's triumph of the human spirit, right? Like that's,
Right.
and we say that, and it sounds corny and hokey to say that out loud, but
Mhm.
in reality, like the reason why that is meaningful in the context of a story like this is because it's meaningful in the
Yeah.
context of a story like this,
Yeah.
right? So like the cliche exists for a reason, and it's because it is something that I think in our core every one of us wants
Mhm.
to experience at some point in our life, right? Where that indomitable spirit wells up and we are able to reach beyond what everybody says we're capable of doing, right? Like that's
Yeah.
just a human compulsion. And sports movies are a really great way to do it because they put it in this great framing device and they put points up on the scoreboard that we can follow. So it just
That's true.
it makes it really easy to translate that
Mhm.
feeling. It's almost in the same way that we use poetry to express love, because love is this thing of like, it's this deep feeling in
Mhm.
our core that doesn't have words, right?
Yeah.
It's not from that part of our brain. And so we use
Mhm.
poetry and we use metaphor and imagery to try and express to somebody what that means, right? And it's
Oh, yeah.
and that sport analogy does the same thing for, I mean, like his name is Will, right?
Mhm.
The I think the clever thing in naming him William is, yeah, and everybody calls him Will, is that
Mhm.
like his defining characteristic is his will. It's his willpower, right? Like it's
Mhm.
his strength of conviction of character that he sees it through all the way,
Mhm.
no matter what. And like you talk about that pain of life,
Mhm.
and that I think you get right at the message of the movie, which is that like, yeah, there are always going to be people on top of you, above
Mhm.
you. It doesn't matter how much you get, how much you attain, how much wealth you collect. There's
Mhm.
always going to be something on top of you making life difficult,
Yep.
and it's a matter of sort of almost stepping aside that pain
Mhm.
and pursuing the things that will bring you joy.
Mhm.
Um,
Yep.
in spite of the fact that the world wants to kill you, right? Like
Yeah.
everything wants to kill you, but
Yeah.
that's what makes life worth living, is that in spite of that we find joy in all of these things, whether it's our friendships or our career or love, whatever, right? It's all there.
Yeah. I think that's a lovely way to put it. I think Campbell tells a story that I think is kind of parallel to what you're saying too, is like um high stakes, right? High stakes
Hmm.
stuff. Like sports give us like high stakes, but they're also low stakes because no one's like getting killed. But in this story, you do have the element of life or death. And a potential sacrifice. Thank God it doesn't go there, but that is on the table.
Hmm.
And Campbell talks about how there was true story. There's a man who's on a bridge that wants to jump, and an officer sees him, comes by, and stops. And just as he stops the guy starts to go over the edge, and the cop, by instinct, gets out and starts running towards him and grabs him just as he's going over the side without holding on to anything. Like, he just grabs him, and he very well could have tumbled over with him, except for the fact that I guess his like the way that he was on the side of the thing, his body did catch most of the weight over the side, and the guy was able to grab and kind of climb up. And what Campbell finds interesting about this story is that when he was asked why did he grab onto the man the way that he did, he said that he could not live with himself if he didn't go over with him.
Hmm.
And he literally put it that way. He said, I could not live my life without, with knowing that I had let him go.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was going to go with him. And that's the part of the human spirit that is so instinctually like reaching out to connect with people, so much so that you would die with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's literally allowing yourself to dive into life, like I said, with all of its pain and all of its misery, and then also giving into the idea of death, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in accepting life, we also have to accept death. And when you're able to experience that, it does, I think, I mean, I haven't experienced it, but I know that, from reading stuff, it's like it opens your mind to the possibility of it and puts you in a position where you recognize that life is so precious, and reaching out to other people and formulating a community and having relationships with other people, romantic or not, are incredibly important to the human experience. So to do that, and to do that above what others expect of you and what others want of you, and to find it for yourself, I truly believe like that's the the power that is within all of us. And that's the power that we need to find through storytelling. It's the
Mm-hmm.
power that we need to find through connecting with people. I just think that that's very important, essentially.
Absolutely. Awesome. I think that's a perfect button on the whole thing. What is that? We kind of, the format is kind of to get into the personal connection, but I think that we've already kind of circled around that stuff a lot while
Yeah,
having this conversation. So I think we're good on that front. Um,
definitely.
awesome. And like I could talk to you for another hour about this probably. But we will wrap it up.
Cool.
Because both of us have lives to get back to. Can't just sit around talking about Heath Ledger movies all day. I
Yeah, I think this inspired me to, I potentially am gonna do like a comparison of like Moulin Rouge and A Knight's Tale, just for funsies, in like a video format. I'm gonna try to start writing that because I really like this one. This
That's
is a fun one.
fantastic.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. That you know what, like that would be a dream I didn't know that I had come true, which is that something that I did would inspire you to go make one of your excellent video essays. Speaking of which, let everybody know where they can find you
Sure.
and more of your great content.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. My channel is Wit and Folly. My Twitter handle there is at wit at at wit_folly, I think.
I think that's right.
It's been so long since I've said it. And then my Twitter handle, my personal Twitter handle, is at black uh _TYM.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, is that it? Like,
Yeah,
should
that's
I
it.
double check? Okay, thanks. um, and then, like I said before, you can also find me on YouTube at Wit and Folly. I make a lot of videos
Mhm.
about this kind of stuff. So, yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really had fun. This is great.
No, it was absolutely my pleasure, and we have a list of other things that you mentioned to do perfect tens for. So we'll have you back. You'll be back. You'll be
Yay!
back. We'll do this again.
Woohoo!
Once I exhaust everybody else that wants to talk about stuff, I'll circle back around
So,
and
like
get you back in here.
2023.
We'll see.
Cool.
We'll see how long it takes me to work through all of my friends and get them
Awesome.
all annoyed with me.
I love
Um,
it.
excellent. Thank you so much for being on. Thank you so much for talking about A Knight's Tale with us. And everybody go subscribe to Wit and Folly. If you like any of the stuff that I talk about, especially, hey, if you listen to the Star Wars podcast that I do and you're ever like, huh, that's interesting. Anything interesting that I've said in the last 2 years, almost 3 years now, on any of the Star Wars podcasts. Yeah, I'm just poorly paraphrasing something that either Ty or Marie Claire has said. So go watch all of Ty's amazing videos on Star Wars.
Oh,
And then
thanks.
everything else that she's done as well, because it's all so good. And then of course, obviously, also, as I said on the last episode, and I say all the time, go subscribe to What the Force. What are you doing?
Aw, that's
How
nice
why
of
do I
you.
have to keep saying this? It's exhausting at this point. Um, but yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much. And
Yeah,
thank you
thank
to
you.
everybody for listening and supporting us on Patreon. And we'll be back. We'll be back. Next week will be an off the record with me for Patreon subscribers. That's exclusive over at patreon.com/ThunderQuack. And then the week after that, we should be back with Force Perspectives. Although I'm on vacation that weekend, I don't know exactly when that episode's going to release. It'll release sometime the week that it's supposed to, but maybe not on the Tuesday. Might be a little bit difficult for me to manage, but just giving you guys the heads up on that. And then yeah, we've got 2 perfect 10s planned for the next little bit. You guys will get another one at some point before the end of October, which will be the perfect 10 Halloween episode, which I am relying on everybody listening to email us, thunderquacknetwork@gmail.com, or hit me up on Twitter or Instagram or any of those social medias, and let me know what your perfect 10 Halloween movies are. And then that episode is going to be all me just reading your guys' thoughts on your perfect 10 Halloween movies, whether it's something scary or something silly. Mine is personally Ernest Scared Stupid, which was just a staple in my house at Halloween. So look forward to that before the end of the month. And then yeah, we've got some great guests and some great topics lined up for November and December coming up. So look forward to all that stuff. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Ty, for being here. And we will catch you on the next episode. ThunderQuack Perfect 10 is hosted by me, Michael Cohn. Follow us on Twitter at ThunderQuackPod, on Instagram at ThunderQuackPodcast, on Facebook at ThunderQuack, and join us on Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. Support the podcast by heading to patreon.com/ThunderQuack to get early access, bonus episodes, and the ThunderQuack Perfect 10 Pop Quiz. ThunderQuack Perfect 10 is part of the ThunderQuack Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.